Welcome to the Spooky Show, where we go everything spooky and scary.
Have you ever wondered if someone could literally disappear and the truth stay buried for almost half a century? Not a week, not a year, 45 years. Imagine growing up without a mom, never knowing what happened to her, hearing rumors, hearing theories, and every birthday wondering if you'll ever get an answer. Because that's exactly what happened to Patricia, better known as Patty Otto. And here's the craziest part. This wasn't one of the cases where detectives suddenly stumbled across some hidden diary or found a box of forgotten evidence in the attic. No, the biggest breakthrough came from something investigators in 1976 couldn't have imagined: DNA. And by the end of the story, it completely changed the case. So I want to ask you, grab a drink, get comfortable, because this rabbit hole gets a lot deeper than you might think. Let's get started. So let's get started from the top. Who was Patty Otto? Patricia Patty Otto wasn't famous. She wasn't all over magazine covers. She wasn't some celebrity everyone recognized. She was just a normal woman, a mother, a daughter, and a friend. Someone who had people who cared about her. Back in the 1970s, Patty's life looked pretty ordinary from the outside, but like a lot of true crime stories, what people saw on the outside wasn't necessarily what was going on behind closed doors. Her marriage had become increasingly troubled. People close to her know things weren't perfect. Arguments weren't uncommon, and eventually, Patty disappeared. Just gone. Just like that. No phone calls, no letters, no explanation, nothing. At first, people hoped she'd simply left for a while. Maybe she needed space, maybe she'd come back, except she never really did. But you may be wondering, why is this case so hard to solve? It sounds like a simple disappearance case, like just blame it on the husband, right? Right? No, it's not as easy as we think. I think it's easy for people to judge investigations from almost 50 years ago. We'll sit here watching a documentary thinking, come on, just check the cameras. Well, there wasn't any. Track the phone. Didn't exist yet. I mean, the iPhone, the smartphone. That is. The detectives working this case were dealing with an entirely different world than the one we know now. No smartphones, no Ring cameras, no GPS, no social media. If somebody vanished, they could genuinely just disappear off the face of the earth. Everything depended on witness statements, physical evidence, and people telling the truth, which, as you learn through multiple times in history, people don't really tell the truth too often. And it's probably an issue, but hey, lying's fun, right? Something about this case was just off. Something didn't add up. Investigators quickly realized something. Patty wasn't the type of person who would simply walk away from her life without saying anything, especially not her daughter. That detail stuck with everyone. Because while adults do disappear voluntarily sometimes, abandoning your child without any warning, that just didn't match what people in Patty's life described about her. Some caring mom just leaving her children just like that. This is totally out of norm for her. Still, belief isn't evidence. Detectives did need proof. And proof was exactly what they did not have, of course. So the investigation slowed. Months became years, and years eventually became decades. Eventually, the case was pushed aside as another cold case. And honestly, that's the saddest part about cold cases. People think it's just a folder collecting dust, but every single one of those files represents a family that never got closure. Somebody is still waiting by the phone, still hoping. Somebody is refusing to give up about this case. But what can you do if a case just goes nowhere in years, right? 45 years later, this is where the story does take a turn. Because while detectives had run out of leads, science hadn't. As DNA technology became more advanced, investigators started reopening old cases all across the country. Cases everyone thought were impossible to solve. Cases older than some of the detectives working them. And eventually, that technology led investigators to a woman who had spent decades without a name. They had found human remains years earlier. but nobody knew who she was. She was simply Jane Doe. Until one DNA test changed everything, flipped this case on its head. When investigators finally learned her identity, this case exploded back to life. Now let's get to the details. So if you remember my attention getter, you remember Patty disappeared in 1976. And for decades, nothing came about this case. No answers, no arrests, no closure. Just imagine being her daughter. No mom ever. Every holiday, every Mother's Day, every birthday, you're left wondering the exact same thing. What actually happened to my mom? Well, this is where the story gets pretty strange. In all my research, this is pretty interesting stuff, right, guys? Listen up. Years after Patty disappeared, the investigators discovered human remains in Washington state. But there's one huge problem. No one knew who they belonged to. No wallet, no ID, no easy way to figure out who this woman was. So she became another unidentified victim, another Jane Doe. And sadly, that happened a lot back then. Today, we have DNA databases, missing person databases, and technology that compare information across the country. Back then, not so much, guys. Back then, you're maybe lucky to get an analog phone call on the dial-up. Yeah. Okay. Well, decades go by and nothing came about her case. Obviously, we learned about this already. Listen up, guys. Make sure to pay attention. Well, think about how much changed while this mystery sat unsolved. People went from analog phones to smartphones. The internet was invented, social media exploded, and people started carrying tiny supercomputers in their pockets, aka the iPhone. Meanwhile, this case sat there waiting for answers. And that's honestly one of the craziest things about cold cases. Time keeps moving for everyone else, but for the victim's family, it can feel like time completely stops. Well, with this new invention of DNA technology and carbon dating and whatnot, investigators could turn old cold cases into solved cases with forensic genetic genealogy, aka the same stuff they use for Not the Father. You know, the show? Yeah. Okay. But the basic idea is actually pretty simple. Traditional DNA can tell investigators if two samples match. Genetic genealogy goes up a step further. It helps investigators identify family relationships by comparing DNA to relatives who share genetic information throughout their lifetimes and throughout genealogy databases. So kind of like you get your mouth swabbed, you send it over, and they'll tell you who your ancestors are. Basically the same thing as that. Now they're using it for crime cases. Or they were. They still are. I don't know what I'm on about. Think of it like putting together just a giant family tree. Just all the family members of this poor no one knows what happened to her. It's in a tree. Well, except using old photo albums and genetics. And when investigators applied that technology to the unidentified remains, this case flipped on its head. Instant sparks flew. There's now hope for this woman's daughter. After more than 4 decades, the Jane Doe finally had a name. Patricia Patty Otto. 45 years of uncertainty, and suddenly the investigators knew who she was. But that one discovery didn't solve the whole case. It did give detectives what they hadn't had in decades. A place to start. So, as the investigation reopened, once Patty was identified, detectives went back through the evidence. Old witness statements, old timelines, people who had been interviewed years earlier were looked at again. Cases like this are interesting because investigators aren't just solving today's mystery. They're trying to solve a mystery from almost 50 years ago. Some Scooby-Doo type of thing. Okay, that's kind of mean. Sorry. This is a real person who died, so we cannot be joking around. Memories fade, witnesses pass away, and evidence can disappear. So every little detail stored in their database mattered for this case. And as investigators re-examined this case, they began building a clearer picture of what may have happened. The disappearance that had once looked impossible to solve was finally moving again. But identifying Patty raised an even bigger questions. If detectives now knew who the victim was, could they finally figure out who was responsible? Because that's exactly where this case was headed. Ooh. And trust me, the next part is where this cold case turns into a murder investigation. Good stuff here, guys. Good stuff, guys. So, when detectives finally identified the Jane Doe as Patty Otto, this case changed overnight. For decades, investigators have been trying to figure out who this unidentified woman's remains were, and now they knew. But the question became, what happened to her? Or it should be, who killed her? Okay, that's not tough. Investigators weren't just looking for new evidence, they were looking at the old evidence through a new lens. Think about it like replaying a movie after you've already seen the ending. You suddenly notice little details that didn't seem important the first time around. Almost like watching Attack on Titan for the second time, and you can see Eren Yeager standing there with his cloak in the background, and you're like, oh my gosh. Or JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 4 with, you can see Yoki Shikage Kira and just in the background. Sorry, I'm geeking out. Well, that's basically what the detectives were doing. They compared old statements, they reviewed old records. They worked to build the most accurate timeline they could from what happened decades earlier. You see, these were probably some brand new cops in this department or wherever this is, Congress. I don't know who does cases. Really pay attention in law class all too much, obviously. And according to investigators, that work eventually led them to focus on someone who had been connected to Patty from the very beginning of the story. Her husband, as you could guess, Douglas Otto. Now, it's really important to remember something here. Being the focus of an investigation is not the same as being proven guilty itself. Investigators still need to gather evidence and present their case to the legal system because that's what you're supposed to do, obviously. So, after decades, did an arrest happen? Years after Patty disappeared, and decades after the investigation first began, Douglas Otto was arrested and charged with connection to Patty's death. Just think about that for a second. Imagine believing you'd never see movement in a case again that you did. And then nearly half a century later, hearing that changes had finally been filed. For Patty's family, it wasn't the end of the story though. But it was something they'd waited almost their entire lifetime to see. The case that had once seemed impossible to solve was finally headed to court. This is a case that happens a lot of the time. A husband killed their wife and then it goes cold. But one of the coolest things about this case was her own daughter, Christina Otto. Imagine growing up never really knowing what happened to your mom. For decades, she searched for answers. She talked to investigators. She followed every lead she could. And then social media became a thing. She decided to try something different. She started posting about her mom's disappearance on TikTok, of all things. You might really be thinking, TikTok? Seriously? Come on, man. I mean, who's going to see this? A little 12-year-old who makes invincible wobbly edits? Well, yeah, it was TikTok. Same app where one video is solving a decade-old case and the next is a guy teaching his pet duck how to skateboard. The internet is a weird place. Obviously, we all know this. But in this case, it became a powerful one. Christina used TikTok to keep her mother's story alive. Every post reached new people. Some had never heard of Patty's case before. Others shared the videos, commented, and helped spread awareness. And that's just something I think is amazing with social media. As much bad as there is on the internet, on social media, people are doing stuff like this. It's amazing. For years, families had to rely on the local newspaper or TV stations, hoping someone would see the Rufflin story. Now, one video can reach millions of people overnight. Did TikTok solve the case? No. It was mainly to spread awareness. The identification came obviously through the DNA and forensic genealogy, but Christina made sure people did not forget her mom. She kept the story alive while investigators continued their work, and honestly, I can't imagine how much determination all that took. 40 plus years without answer, and she still refused to stop fighting. That kind of persistence is incredible. All right, guys, now let's get to the case. Sorry, I wanted to include that just because I feel like that's a cool part of this case. Her daughter was posting that on TikTok. I think I remember seeing about this back in the day. On my hours of mindlessly doom scrolling every day. You know, I got to get those screen time hours in. Well, after decades of unanswered questions, the investigation had finally reached the courtroom for Patty's family. This wasn't just another criminal case. It was a real first chance in nearly half a century to hear evidence presented in public and finally get some answers. Think about how long that is. 45 years. It's literally double my age, bro. I'm not even close to 20. I'm kind of close to 20. I'm unk, bro. I'm unk. Well, some of the detectives who originally worked out this case had already retired. Technology had completely changed. Entire generations grew up. Yet this case was still moving through the justice system. That's honestly kind of hard to wrap my head around. I'm going to be honest, guys. Think about that. 45 years a case has been open. That's literally as old as Zelda, bro. Zelda's 45-year anniversary, I think, is this year. W's in the chat. Ocarina of Time remake. Anyone can be playing? Well, let's just move on. Sorry, guys. It's easy to think that if a case goes unsolved for 10 or 20 years, that's it. Game over. But probably not. Obviously not. My bad, guys. Someone, somewhere, kept working. Scientists kept improving technology. Investigators kept revisiting evidence. And eventually, that work gave Patty her name back. To me, it's one of the most powerful parts of this story. Not because it erases what happens, because it really doesn't, but because families deserve answers, even if those answers do take decades. Well, as we close the book, the case, that was the story of Patricia, or Patty Otto, a woman who disappeared in 1976, whose identity remained unknown for decades, and whose case shows just how much forensic science has changed criminal investigations. If you enjoyed this video and want to see lesser known true crime cases, not just the same stories everyone has already heard, make sure to subscribe. And like this video, guys. Like it. I've already started digging through more cases because honestly that one was kind of fun to look into. So some cases get even crazier. This one on the crazy scale was on the bottom a little bit, but some of these cases are gonna get insane, guys. So make sure you tune in. I'm kind of excited to make more of this. It's kind of fun, guys. I'm gonna be posting more of these. I'm gonna become like a little investigator myself. Call me Eli the investigator. But most importantly, thank you guys for watching. Make sure you go support Christina Otto's TikTok page. I'll probably put like the @ here. If I don't, I'm a bad person, guys. I'm a bad person if I don't. And hopefully tune into the next one. I'll see you guys next time. Peace.